Imagine five men: a software billionaire worth over $100 billion, a pope who oversees the most priceless treasures in history, the director of the FBI during the most dangerous decade in modern intelligence, a future president photographed years before anyone cared what he wore, and the chairman of one of the largest car companies on the planet. None of them know each other. None ever coordinated anything. And yet, on every single wrist sits the exact same watch, a piece of plastic that costs about as much as a sandwich. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why. And the answer is not what you think. Start with the man who gave the most honest explanation anyone has ever offered. Chuck Feeney, an Irish-American businessman who co-founded duty-free shoppers. He turned airport retail into a global industry. He grew up in a working-class family in New Jersey during the Depression. Feeney served as a radio operator in the Air Force, then went to Cornell on the GI Bill. By the late 1980s, Forbes ranked him among America's very richest people. He was wealthier than Rupert Murdoch, wealthier than Donald Trump, with a fortune north of $1 billion. Almost nobody knew. For years, Feeney had quietly been giving nearly all of it away. Not a portion, almost everything. Across his lifetime, he donated $8 billion. He donated to education, healthcare, and human rights, always anonymously, without ceremonies or buildings named after him. He called it giving while living. The secret only came out by accident decades after it started. Warren Buffett called him a hero. Bill Gates said Feeney inspired the giving pledge. Through all of it, the billions earned and billions given, the economy class seats, the plastic bag instead of a briefcase. Feeney wore a Casio F-91W, a $15 digital watch. When a journalist asked him about it, his answer was barely a sentence. If a $15 watch with a battery lasting 5 years can tell him the time, why would he need a Rolex? That was the entire conversation. He died in 2023 at 92, with about $2 million left to his name, and a $15 Casio still on his wrist. Now flip to the other end of the spectrum. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, one of the most photographed faces alive. With a net worth above $100 billion, he could call any watchmaker on Earth and have a custom timepiece within months. Instead, for over a decade, Gates has shown up at press conferences wearing a Casio Duro, a $70 steel dive watch from sporting goods stores. Sometimes it is a different budget Casio model entirely, but always something under $100. There is one detail I cannot stop thinking about. At a conference in the Philippines, Gates was wearing a Tag Heuer worth roughly $1,400. He asked the audience to guess its price. Someone guessed $600. Gates handed that person the watch right on the spot, giving away something worth well over $1,000 to a stranger. Because of a guessing game, then he went right back to wearing his $70 Casio. He kept the cheap one and gave away the expensive one. That is not a man performing humility for cameras. That is a man who has already decided, privately, what a watch is actually for. So what kind of person reaches that conclusion? Not someone with no other option. Not someone performing minimalism for an audience. Not someone who picked it up from a lifestyle blog. This is someone who has genuinely worked through the anxiety that makes expensive objects feel necessary. Through decades of real decisions and real consequences, they settled something fundamental. And strangely, that resolution shows up more often at the very top. People still climbing tend to spend heavily on things everyone can see. People who have already arrived, all the way at the top, often just stop. Not to make a statement in the opposite direction, but because the underlying anxiety driving all that spending has already been settled by genuine security. You do not need a watch to tell the room who you are when the room already knows. And you already know that it knows. Barack Obama wore a Casio F-91W long before his presidency. Back when he was a state senator from Illinois, nobody was paying the slightest attention to what was on his wrist. No headlines, no scrutiny, no image consultants. Just a young man wearing a cheap watch because it worked. That is probably the most honest version of this entire story, a choice made with zero audience. Pope Francis has been photographed for years, wearing a Casio MQ-24, a model so basic, it does not even have a backlight. Here is a man at the head of an institution, that has guarded some of the most valuable objects in human civilization for centuries. Who could wear literally anything, and he reaches for a watch that costs less than a nice dinner in Rome. Not as a vow of poverty, just a preference. Nobody assigned that decision to him. Robert Mueller ran the FBI from 2001 to 2013, the longest tenure since J. Edgar Hoover, through arguably the most consequential decade in modern American intelligence history. For all of it, he wore a Casio DW-290 with a military-style face, turned inward on his wrist, consistently enough that it became part of how people recognized him. Here is the detail that lives in my head permanently. That exact same Casio DW-290 model is the watch Tom Cruise wore as Ethan Hunt in the very first Mission Impossible film in 1996. The real director of the FBI and a fictional spy wearing the identical watch for completely unrelated reasons. Mueller almost certainly had no idea and would not have cared even slightly if he did. Same watch, different worlds. And then there is Chung Eui-sun, executive chairman of Hyundai Motor Group, a man who runs a conglomerate spanning cars, construction, shipbuilding, and finance, with access to a fleet of some of the most advanced vehicles his own factories produce. He has also been photographed wearing a plain Casio. The pattern does not stop at geography or industry or even century. It shows up wherever someone has built something real and simply stopped needing objects to announce it. Because what matters to them is the outcome, not the display. There is a useful way to think about what a watch communicates. One signal is status. I have arrived. Look at this. That is a Rolex or a Patek Philippe, designed from the ground up to announce itself. The kind of thing that finishes a sentence at a dinner table before you even speak. Another signal is identity. This is the kind of person I am. That is a G-Shock on a soldier, a dive watch on a marine biologist, a pilot's chronograph on someone who actually flies planes. It speaks to a role, not a bank balance. And then there is a third category, which is really the absence of any signal at all. I have nothing left to prove. That is the Casio on a billionaire's wrist. Not silence as a statement, but silence as the natural result of having nothing left to demonstrate. The luxury watch industry survives on a very specific anxiety. The fear that without the right object, the room will not understand who you are. That fear has been carefully cultivated for decades. A major luxury brand can spend tens of millions of dollars a year purely on marketing. That money comes from somewhere. It comes from the price tag. Buy a $15,000 watch, and you are partially funding the campaign that convinced you it was worth it. The people in this story resolved that anxiety through other means long ago. Gates does not need a Rolex to announce his arrival, because the room already knows. Feeney never wanted anyone to know what room he was in at all. Francis simply is not interested in the room's opinion. Once the anxiety is gone, the watch is freed to do nothing but tell the time. Here is the part almost nobody talks about. The Casio F-91W is not just a cheap watch that happened to become popular. It is a genuine piece of engineering that happens to cost $20. Casio was founded in Tokyo in 1946 by Tadao Casio, a precision machinist who rebuilt a small manufacturing operation with his brothers after the war. Their very first product was a simple metal ring that held a cigarette, so your hands stayed free. A small practical fix for an everyday problem. That same philosophy runs through every Casio that followed. The F-91W, released in 1989, is a direct descendant of that practical problem-solving approach. It has been in continuous production for 35 years with essentially one minor tweak to the display contrast back in 2007. What does it actually do? It keeps time within about 30 seconds a month, more accurate than most mechanical watches, costing 5 figures. It has a stopwatch, an alarm, an automatic calendar, a battery that lasts 7 years, a case under a centimeter thick, and a weight you barely notice. Roughly 3 million units have been made every single year since launch, more than 100 million total, making it by most measures the best-selling watch in human history. And critically, Casio designs and builds its own movements in-house. Plenty of fashion watch brands buy generic quartz movements from bulk suppliers for a few dollars, drop them into a stylish case, and charge 20 times the manufacturing cost for the name on the dial. Casio actually engineers the thing that keeps the time. The G-Shock line tells a similar story from another angle. Back in 1981, a Casio engineer named Chung Eui-sun accidentally dropped and destroyed his own watch. Instead of shrugging it off, he spent 2 years trying to build something that could survive a 10-meter fall onto concrete. His team went through more than 200 prototypes before they found something that actually worked. The result was the original G-Shock. In 1983, more than 100 million G-Shocks have sold since. One of the early models is still in production today, still passing the exact same durability tests. That is not what a cheap toy does. That is serious engineering. Even the $70 Casio Duro that Gates wears passes the same ISO diving certification. Swiss dive watches cost 30 times as much and are tested against the same standard. Underwater, there is no functional difference. The price gap is entirely about finishing, heritage, and the resale value of a brand name. Gates is not buying a watch to flip later. He is buying a tool to wear. For that purpose, the Casio Duro is not a compromise. It is simply the right answer. There is one more detail that does not fit neatly into a story about billionaires and popes, but it is too strange to leave out. After the 11th of September attacks, investigators cataloging the belongings of detainees at Guantanamo Bay found that dozens were wearing a Casio F-91W, or its close relative. The DW training camps had reportedly handed the watch out to recruits because the alarm and countdown functions were reliable. The watch itself cost only a few dollars anywhere in the world. At one point, American assessment materials noted that owning this model could be treated as a potential indicator, an indicator of bomb-making training. So the same watch that became, in certain intelligence circles, one of the most recognized objects on the wrong side of a battlefield, was also sitting on the wrist of a young Barack Obama in photographs from years before the White House, long before anyone cared what he wore. Same watch, same years, completely different wrists, completely different reasons. I genuinely do not know what to do with that fact, except present it exactly as it is, because no framing makes it less strange. That, in the end, is the entire argument for what this watch actually is. Not a luxury object, not a fashion statement, not a political symbol, a purely functional object, so accurate, so durable, and so available to literally anyone. It crosses every line, economic, ideological, geographic, moral, without caring about a single one of them. It tells the time within 30 seconds a month, runs 7 years on one battery, weighs almost nothing, and costs about $20. And it has delivered on exactly that promise, without changing for 35 years, to over 100 million people, some of whom happen to run countries. Some build fortunes, or give them away entirely. Casio never set out to become the watch of the ultra-wealthy. It never ran a single campaign aimed at billionaires. It just built something that worked reliably, affordably, and charged as little as it possibly could. It turns out that combination is exactly what people who have already settled every status question in their lives actually want. Function with absolutely no performance tax attached. And the person who instead reaches for the $15,000 alternative is paying for the privilege. The privilege of not having figured that out yet, quietly funding the exact campaign designed to keep that anxiety alive. So here is the question. Which of these names surprised you the most? And which other powerful people do you think might be hiding a plastic watch under their sleeve? Because trust me, the list goes a lot further than just these 5.